It's been reported that allies of Boris Johnson have warned Rishi Sunak that a disappointing set of local election results in May could prompt a bid to replace the Prime Minister with his predecessor. Speculation has ramped up in recent days that Boris Johnson could return as Tory leader. Was it a mistake to get rid of him in the first place? Let's speak to Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, who is a close ally of Boris Johnson, former Deputy Mayor for London. Lovely to have you, Lord Greenhalgh, and thank you so much for your time. Was it a mistake getting rid of Boris Johnson?
Absolutely. I was one of those ministers that resigned because Boris resigned back in July. I was at one stage, along with Eddie Hughes, we were the only ministers left in the Levelling Up department. But we resigned when I resigned, and then subsequently Eddie resigned. But we were the counter-herd, if you like, to the herd. So we certainly believe that it was wrong that Boris stepped down. But more importantly, the party members think it's wrong that Boris stepped down. There's been a lot of polling, particularly by Conservative Post, that show that 90% of members want to see Boris back rather than as Prime Minister rather than the sitting Prime Minister. I mean, that's very important. And of course, we know that when there were rumours about Boris, potentially back in the back end of last year in October, it was very clear that he had a strong support within the parliamentary party, not a majority, but the 100 needed to get on the ballot. So I think there's a strong case, and I said earlier this week that there's a strong probability that he will return.
You know Boris Johnson. Does he have the appetite for power still?
Well, I don't think it's about power for Boris. I mean, he has a true spirit of public service. He wants to deliver. I found working for him in City Hall tremendously fulfilling. It was the first time I'd worked for someone who'd been a council leader before then, and he said out very clearly what he wanted me to do, and it just enabled me to get on with it. And that's the perfect boss for me. I think he's a great political leader, a visionary. He has the soul of a leader, and that's what this country needs.
But did that chairman role that was so successful at City Hall work when he was at number 10, where you have to be a little more Thatcherite? You've got to be head of every department. That didn't really suit Boris, did it?
Well, I think what Boris does require is the structure around him, and he certainly had that in City Hall with a very strong chief of staff, very effective deputy mayors, I wasn't in the number 10 operation, but it's fair to say I think that there'll be improvements. But what I'd say about Boris is that at the second time of asking, he gets better, and his second mayoral term, in many ways, was an absolute triumph. And I fully predict he will come back and get the structure right to govern very effectively for this country.
We know he's very good at winning elections, but do you feel that he struggles with the bit in between running the country? Do you really think there's an appetite on those Tory backbenches to have him back, particularly after, towards the end of his time at number 10, he was limping from one self-inflicted scandal to another? Well,
I don't agree with that assessment of his first term. I think he made many of the big calls right. And, I worked for Michael Gove, and Michael Gove was first in saying that he was right about liberalising and freeing up in the wake of the COVID pandemic earlier than many wanted to. He was absolutely right to be the first major Western leaders to support Ukraine with military aid. And for that, they're going to be forever grateful and continue to look to Britain for leadership. And I know that's continuing under the current Prime Minister, but Boris started that. So I think he always got the big calls right. And with the right structure around him, I think he's going to be one of the greatest Prime Ministers and will be assessed one of the greatest Prime Ministers of the 21st century. But he needs that second chance, and I think there's a strong probability that will happen.
Well, he has colossal qualities, doesn't he? An excellent political judgment. He's charismatic. He's a very, very clever man, of course, very well read. An amazing wordsmith. God bless him for getting Brexit done. He ended our Brexit deadlock. And of course, he kept Jeremy Corbyn out of number 10 in 2019. So he's got his strengths. What, in your view, is the percentage chance that he would throw his hat in the ring if things work out badly for Rishi Sunak in May?
Well, I think that's a litmus test for the current Prime Minister. We're going to certainly look, because the first and foremost in politics, you've got to win. If you're not in government, you can't do anything. You can't achieve anything that we Conservatives believe in. So I think Conservatives up and down the country will look at those locals. Now, I know from my time, and I spent 20 years in local government, when you lose your councillors, when you lose seats, when you lose councils that you previously run, you lose your machinery and your ability to campaign. And so the sitting MPs will then worry, and then I believe there will be a strong movement for change.
Lord Greenhalgh, you know Boris Johnson intimately well. Does he want this? Does he want to make a spectacular return?
Well, my assessment he wants to deliver for Britain, but he'll only do it if people want him back. And I think we've got to coax him back and say that we want him. And I know, when I go shopping, it's the only thing people want to talk about. They love Boris. They want this guy back in number 10. Let's make a boxing analogy. He's the person with the mandate. He got the 80-seat mandate. It was his campaign. He led that campaign, and they want to see him back where he belongs, in number 10.
OK, very briefly, yes or no. I think the grassroots would have him back in a flash. Many of my viewers, but not those Tory backbenchers. That's the ultimate stumbling block, isn't it?
You know what? When they start seeing looking down the barrel of a gun and look like they're going to lose their seats, I think many of them will change their minds, and we'll see a strong swell of support for the return of this man.
Lord Stephen Greenhalgh, thank you so much for joining us.